Let's break down 6 last-minute waiver wire ads going into Week 15 of the 2024 fantasy football season that could help you guys dominate the first round of the 2024 fantasy football playoffs. All right, and we're starting the video off with Sincere McCormick of the Las Vegas Raiders, coming in at 44% rostered and coming off of a game where he had 10.9 fantasy points against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 15 touches, 78 yards on the ground, 3 targets, 2 receptions, and 11 receiving yards. A little bit of a tougher matchup this week against the Atlanta Falcons run defense, but the thing that I've been talking about since last week that we really need to take a look at when it comes to the chance on Sincere McCormick is the fact that he plays the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 16 and the New Orleans Saints in Week 17, 2 bottom 5 teams against the running back position in fantasy football. Now, to kind of get the elephant out of the room, what we do know is that Alexander Mattison is on track to play in Week 15, but the Raiders coaching staff has come out and said that Sincere McCormick is their guy. This is going to be the RB1 moving forward. So I won't be surprised if we still see touches to Alexander Mattison, who for majority of the season acted as the RB1 for the Raiders, but nonetheless, I really think that there's a strong chance that McCormick gets the primary touches, the RB1 touches, and those value touches and the goal line. So I'm a hope for Sincere McCormick if you guys are in a desperation state in Week 15, and we do have some big names kind of popping up here at the end of the week as out. So I think McCormick an emergency play this week in a tougher matchup, but the next 2 weeks, especially if we see McCormick get the bulk of the volume, even with Madison active this week, he could end up being a league winner against those 2 atrocious run defenses and the Jaguars and the Saints to wrap up the season. So I still think that going out and rostering Sincere McCormick while you can holds a ton of value. So he's got some value this week. Plenty of value in Week 16 and 17 if he really, truly is the RB1, like the Raiders coaching staff is saying. If McCormick is out there and available, sitting at 44% rostered, he is a true last-minute waiver wire addition going into Week 15. Next up, let's take a look at Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars, coming in at 58% rostered. Bigsby's coming off a week where he had 18 touches on the ground, 55 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 2 targets for 1 grab, and 7 receiving yards, which resulted in 13.2 fantasy points. A pretty good strength of schedule left for the remainder of the season for the Jaguars running back, but mainly looking at Tank Bigsby here as he gets the Jets, the Raiders, and the Titans. No, like, incredibly bad run defenses here, but all either mediocre, or pretty bad run defenses, at least Tennessee in Week 17, the team that he just had those 13.2 fantasy points against. But yes, Travis Etienne is still on this roster, and Etienne is also coming off of a week where he had double-digit fantasy points in Week 14, but Etienne was really bad in that game against the Titans. He had 4 touches on the ground. That was it. Bigsby had 14 more touches than Etienne, just 20 rushing yards for Etienne. But Etienne had 4 targets, caught every single one of those passes, and resulted in 50 receiving yards. So, I mean, there's still some sort of role for Travis Etienne here, but you look over the past couple of weeks with the touches that Etienne has got, he's been incredibly inefficient and a very, very bad running back when it comes to fantasy football. So I think that the value lies with Bigsby because he was getting more of the goal line work, and overall, just getting more work in general and more touches in the run game as a whole. And like I said, this is a pretty decent strength of schedule to wrap up the season. And the Jets rank okay against running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed, but this run defense as a whole on the season has not been that good. So he has moved up to 58% rostered, a little bit higher than the early waiver wire video we did on Sunday night. But nonetheless, if you need a desperation play in Week 15, I think Bigsby could be that guy, and he does hold some value past this week as well. So let's take a look at Elijah Moore of the Cleveland Browns, who's been really up and down over the past couple of weeks. Let's just look at the last 4 games. 18.6 fantasy points, 5.1 fantasy points, 19.2 fantasy points, and this past week, 6.4 fantasy points, 4 targets, 3 catches, 34 receiving yards. This week he's going to go up against the Kansas City Chiefs, which sounds like a tough matchup, but the Chiefs secondary has not been as strong as of late, and they're a little bit banged up as well. It's a home game for the Browns. Jameis Winston's going to go out there and throw the football a ton. Winston has thrown the football 41 or more times every time since becoming the starter for the Browns, except for that snow game in Week 12 against the Steelers. So we know he's going to throw a lot. And I talked about this in the Sneaky Starts video yesterday, talking about Cedric Tillman, who has now been ruled out for the week. There's a lot of opportunity going into this week already because David Njoku is unlikely to play this week. He has a chance. He's going to try and push to play. It's a little bit more positive than some of the earlier reports on the week about Njoku, but there is a strong chance that Njoku still cannot suit up and play this week. And now Tillman is out as well. So there's going to be more targets either way for Elijah Moore this week, and he has dropped down to 38% rostered. And although he's been inconsistent, he still has double digits in every game since week 7, except for 3 games. And this is going to be one of those games where the Browns are forced to throw the football, and they're just one of these teams, like, yeah, they're not playing for the playoffs or anything here, but they're going to come out and compete. And like I said, they're likely to throw the football quite a bit with Jameis Winston at the quarterback position. So especially if David Njoku is not able to play in this matchup, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Elijah Moore, and this could easily be one of those higher volume games, higher target games, where he comes through with a potential double-digit performance. So if you need a last-second emergency play here in Week 15, I think Elijah Moore could easily be that guy for you. If we get word that David Njoku is out this week, I'm going to head straight to Underdog to take the over on Elijah Moore's current receptions. His line is currently sitting at 4.5 receptions. He has hit that line in all those double digits games since week 7. So every game except for 3 games, Elijah Moore has had over 6 receptions, and I think he'll easily do that this week against the Chiefs without Njoku potentially, without Cedric Tillman, outside of Jerry Jeudy. You're looking at Elijah Moore as the only true pass catcher on this team, so I'm heading straight to Underdog to take the over on Elijah Moore's receptions. All new users who sign up on Underdog with promo code TheCatch, that link is down below, are going to get a free NFL Pick'em to use towards Week 15's action. Take your free Pick'em, take the over on Elijah Moore's receptions. Once both of those lines hit, you'll automatically triple your cash entry. And on top of that, as long as you signed up using promo code TheCatch, Underdog is also going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. All right, next up we got Ray McCloud of the Atlanta Falcons. This was a player that I talked about in the early waiver video on the week as well. He's coming off of a game where he had 16.1 fantasy points, 11 targets, 8 grabs, 98 receiving yards, and he's quietly had double digits in every game since week 9, except for week 10 against the Saints. 12.5 in week 9, 10.6 in week 11, a bye week in week 12, 13.3 in week 13, and like I said, 16.1 fantasy points this past week, and he's got a decent strength of schedule to wrap up the season, getting the Raiders, the Giants, and the Commanders. Not great pass defenses, not bad pass defenses per se, but still pass defenses that should allow for some opportunity to Ray McCloud, and the Raiders have been pretty bad against slot receivers specifically on the season, where Ray McCloud primarily lines up out of, right? And the Falcons in this weird state right now. They're not out of the playoffs. They're not in the playoffs right now, but they are back on the outside looking in, watching very closely what happens with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they have to go out and try and win every single game possible. So they will be throwing the football a lot. They're going to be throwing a lot of touchdowns with Cousins at quarterback. I don't know right now, but they will be throwing the football a lot, and Ray McCloud will still be a big part of that. Obviously, Drake London, Darnell Mooney in front of him. I don't quite know if Kyle Pitts is in front of him anymore, but there's going to be a lot of opportunity here. He has 6 or more targets in 3 of his last 4 games. okay matchups here to wrap up the season. Like I said, they're not fantastic, but they're certainly not bad. And he's quietly put together some nice double-digit performances, and he only sits at 29% rostered. So, yes, there's absolutely the potential for a dud game out of McCloud. We've seen him kind of go on these nice streaks earlier in the season, then just hit single digits for a couple weeks as well, but there's also opportunity for another double-digit performance. So if Ray McCloud is out there and you need a true desperation play in the flex, he could be that guy for you going into Week 15. All right, next up, let's take a look at Quentin Johnston, everybody's favorite receiver. And, you look at Quentin Johnston over the past couple of weeks. Let's start with Week 14 this past week against the Chiefs. 15.8 fantasy points, 7 targets, 5 grabs, 48 receiving yards, and a touchdown in a game where Ladd McConkey did not play against the Kansas City Chiefs. But take it a little bit further. Since Week 9, he's given you a touchdown and double digits in every game except for 2. It's just the 2 games where he didn't do it were really bad, right? He had the goose egg in Week 12 against the Ravens and just 3.2 fantasy points the following week in a good matchup against the Falcons. And obviously, if Ladd McConkey is able to play this week, that's going to hurt Quentin Johnston to a degree, of course, because McConkey is going to come out here and get the bulk of the volume. And we all know what McConkey will do with that volume, right? But he's still going into the week listed as questionable with a knee and shoulder injury. So if McConkey is able to suit up, is he truly 100%? Are they going to lean on Quentin Johnston a little bit more? And if he doesn't play, then they will absolutely lean on Quentin Johnston a little bit more. And I'll also mention while we're here that Josh Palmer is going to fall into the same category. He sits at 21% rostered as a potential spot play at the receiver position or flex position if Ladd McConkey does not play this week. He also hit double digits this past week with 13.8 fantasy points, 9 targets, 6 grabs, 78 receiving yards. But I just feel like Quentin Johnston has a little bit more touchdown upside, but Josh Palmer is certainly a potential play as well, dependent on the health of Ladd McConkey. And regardless, all these Chargers receivers are going into the week with a great matchup as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers secondary has allowed a ton of fantasy points to the wide receiver position thus far on the season. So the matchup is here. There could be increased opportunity for Quentin Johnston or Josh Palmer. And even if Ladd McConkey is able to play, whether he's 100% or not 100%, just due to this matchup, there's certainly going to be some opportunity. And this is going to be one of those matchups where we got both teams here. Huge playoff implications, needing to win every single possible game. So this will be a competitive game script as well. So that's going to help the fantasy output in this matchup as well. So if you're in need of a desperation play, take a look at these Chargers receivers going into Week 15. And last but not least, let's talk about Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills, who is sitting at 60% rostered, but could very well be available in your league. He just got cleared to play yesterday. Going into Week 15, we haven't seen him play since Week 9 against Miami, but taking away the game where he got hurt in Week 9, we had a nice little stretch there for Keon Coleman with double digits and 3 out of 4 matchups between weeks 5 and 8 with 11.9, 5.6, 16.5, and 18 fantasy points. Now, I think there's a lot of risk involved with Keon Coleman. Talked about Amari Cooper in the sneaky starts video. Still like Cooper going into the week, coming off of a nice game. And Khalil Shakir is still my preferred Buffalo Bills wide receiver going into the week. But Coleman gets a pretty decent strength of schedule, including this nice Week 15 matchup on the road going up against the Detroit Lions, who the weakest part of that defense is easily their secondary, and they've been a little bit banged up on that defense, mostly up front, but still at this point in the season as well. Then the following week, another good matchup against the Patriots. Week 17, not great against the Jets, but I mean, most of the defensive pressure will probably go to Cooper and Shakir, right? So there's a lot of opportunity here to wrap up the fantasy season for Keon Coleman. And he was really playing as the receiver that you wanted to start for the Buffalo Bills before he got hurt for the most part as well, maybe outside of Shakir, who was bringing that more consistent floor. And Cooper had just joined this team in that time period as well, around week 7. And Coleman produced in weeks 7 and 8. before getting injured in week 9. So Coleman's certainly a risky option, but an option that brings some upside and could be a nice stash to wrap up the season as well. So hard to say exactly what we're going to get out of this Bills offense on a weekly basis, as Josh Allen can completely take over with his legs. We could always see a big week out of James Cook. We can see some Ray Davis involved. You got Cooper and Shakir involved. You got some tight ends who are still on this team, even though Kincaid's been hurt and the tight end position hasn't been great. I mean, we even got Mac Hollins making plays at times as well. But nonetheless, Keon Coleman brings some nice upside, has a strong matchup in week 15, and I won't be surprised if the Bills want to get him involved sooner rather than later going into this matchup against the Lions. So take a look. If Keon Coleman's out there, he's rostered in 60% of leagues. He could be a player that helps you guys get over the hump in week 15. And that'll do it for today's video. There are 6 last-minute waiver wire additions going into the first round of the fantasy playoffs. As always, guys, I'm answering as many fantasy football questions in the comment section down below as I possibly can. So if you guys need anything whatsoever moving into week 15, be sure to drop me a comment. I'll get back to as many of you guys as I possibly can. But most importantly, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on any of the content for the rest of the season, because we're going to have every single thing that you guys could possibly need to help you guys dominate the rest of the 2024 fantasy football playoffs. So make sure you guys are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the content. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.